order is here. Every word, every step, every thought, watched, scanned, controlled.
In the world of the Cold War, at a time when every new report from Moscow or Beijing sent shivers of fear through the corridors of Washington, projects were born that today sound more like the plot of a thriller than historical reality. One of the darkest and most secret undertakings of the American intelligence services was a program that went down in history under the name MKULTRA. It was an operation surrounded from the very beginning by an aura of secrecy, manipulation, and the tragic stories of participants who were never asked for their consent. This is the story of obsession, fear, and experiments that changed the face of research on the human mind and that still fuel the imagination of conspiracy theorists to this day. The year was 1953. The United States was entering one of the most intense phases of its rivalry with the Eastern Bloc. The Korean War, reports of brutal interrogations of prisoners by the Chinese and Soviets, and rumors of advanced brainwashing techniques were spreading. Alan Dulles, the newly appointed director of the Central Intelligence Agency, was determined not to let America fall behind. In his view, the Soviet Union was working on methods of psychological manipulation that could destroy Western civilization from within. It was in this atmosphere of fear and paranoia that the MKULTRA program was born. MK stood for mind control, deliberately spelled with a K to evoke the German research projects of the Second World War. Ultra was a reference to the famous Ultra project, in which the Allies had broken the Enigma codes. The name itself was meant to suggest something monumental, secret, and absolutely groundbreaking. MKULTRA was to be the weapon against brainwashing, but it quickly turned into a tool for testing methods designed to break through the barrier of human will. Within MKULTRA, more than 150 sub-projects were launched. They were funded through front foundations, grants, and academic contracts, so that no one would connect them to the CIA. Universities, psychiatric hospitals, prisons, and military laboratories all became sites of experimentation. The disturbing truth was that the overwhelming majority of participants had no idea that they were taking part in anything more than an ordinary psychological study. The most notorious and controversial tool of the program was LSD, lysergic acid diethylamide. This psychedelic, discovered by Swiss chemist Albert Hofmann, seemed to the CIA to hold potential to revolutionize psychological warfare. In laboratories and hospitals, LSD was administered to students, soldiers, psychiatric patients, and even CIA operatives. Many of them had no knowledge they were being dosed. The reactions were dramatically different. For some, euphoria and openness to suggestion. For others, terrifying panic attacks and psychoses that lasted far beyond the drug's immediate effects. But LSD was just the beginning. Experiments also involved amphetamines, barbiturates, heroin, mescaline, and various combinations of these substances. In the search for a so-called truth serum, people were given mixtures of drugs designed to break them down and force them to talk. The results often included convulsions, unconsciousness, and, in some cases, permanent brain damage. Another area of experimentation was hypnosis. Researchers wanted to know whether a person could be hypnotized so deeply that they would carry out orders completely against their own conscience. Could an unwitting assassin be created? Someone who would commit an act of violence and later remember nothing? It sounds like science fiction, but for the CIA, it was a real line of inquiry. Sensory deprivation was also employed. Volunteers, or sometimes victims, were locked in special chambers, deprived for hours or even days of light, sound, and contact with the outside world. The human brain in such conditions began to generate its own visions and hallucinations, leaving the subject vulnerable to suggestion. Other experiments relied on sleep deprivation, pushing people to the very limits of endurance. Perhaps the most dramatic and tragic stories were those of individual victims. One of the best-known cases was Frank Olson, an army scientist and CIA associate. In 1953, he was secretly given LSD during a work meeting. Days later, Olson fell to his death from a hotel window in New York City. The official version was suicide, but his family fought for decades to uncover the truth. When documents about MKULTRA surfaced in the 1970s, suspicion grew that Olson had been murdered because he knew too much. But Olson was far from the only casualty. Prison inmates were experimented on, often promised lighter sentences in exchange for participation. Psychiatric patients were subjected to massive electroshock treatments meant to erase memories and open the way for reprogramming personality. In Canada, at a hospital in Montreal, Dr. Ewan Cameron carried out experiments funded by the CIA, involving prolonged sessions of playing recorded messages to patients under the influence of drugs and electroshock therapy. Many of them never recovered their mental health. All of this took place under a heavy shroud of secrecy. The CIA knew full well that if the public discovered the scale and nature of MKULTRA, the scandal would be catastrophic. For that reason, records were carefully disguised, and in 1973, CIA Director Richard Helms ordered the destruction of program archives. Thousands of pages of reports were burned or shredded. Yet, some documents survived, buried in bureaucratic files. Despite the cover-up, the truth emerged in the mid-1970s. In 1975, the Senate's Church Committee and President Gerald Ford's Rockefeller Commission investigated the CIA's activities. They revealed to the world that the agency had conducted experiments on American citizens without their knowledge or consent. The revelations shocked the nation. In a country that prided itself on freedom and individual rights, a government agency had committed abuses worthy of a totalitarian regime. From that time on, MKULTRA became synonymous with the CIA's darkest secrets. The program has been referenced countless times in books, films, and television series. It has fueled conspiracy theories, many of which claim that the CIA never truly ended its work on mind control, but merely shifted it into new programs under different names. Even today, historians and researchers ask, how far did MKULTRA really go? How many lives were broken in the name of science and national security? Was it truly a defensive project against Soviet brainwashing? Or was it instead an obsession with the idea of power over the human mind? The legacy of MKULTRA is bitter. On one hand, it advanced research into psychology, psychotropic substances, and hypnosis. On the other, it left behind hundreds, perhaps thousands, of victims whose lives were irreparably damaged. It showed just how thin the line can be between research and abuse, between science and torture. And that is why MKULTRA still fascinates and horrifies us. It is a story that reminds us that the darkest experiments are not always the inventions of fictional mad scientists, but can emerge from the heart of state institutions cloaked in the language of patriotism and security. And the questions of whether similar projects still exist remain unanswered.
The new order is here. Every word, every step, every thought, watched, scanned, controlled.